This conference will now be recorded.
All right. So thank you so much for joining us this morning. This is the How to Apply webinar for the FY23 HUD CoC program. So today we're just going to do a brief overview of what the program actually is, what some of the HUD priorities for this funding are, so that you're aware of those. A little bit about our local NOFA, our scoring criteria, timeline, submission details, and then, like I said, lots of time for questions. So if you have questions, again, just put them in the chat as we got to go through everything, and then I'll go through and answer any questions that you have on the back end. Just a disclaimer for this training, it is a general overview of our process. We still encourage all applicants to read the full NOFO from HUD, as well as all the other documents that pertain to this funding opportunity. Materials and resources are posted on our website. We also have a funding email. It's funding@fredericksburgcoc.org. You can always contact that email with any questions or any needs that you have. I love to remind folks that CoC staff is here during this process. It's not just about putting out the application, reading them, and telling you whether or not you're accepted, but we are here to provide technical assistance through the entire process. That includes reading your applications, that includes answering questions, that helps getting data, anything that we can do to really make strong applicants and make it a strong competition, CoC staff want to do. So we really help with facilitating the process, but just tell us what your needs are. In particular, your responsibility is about reading everything that you can through that process as well. All right, so just a little bit about welcome. So you know who's kind of in this process. Right now, the only CoC staff is myself. It's Sam. I'm the Housing and Community Health Program Director. My contact information is here for you. Please reach out. Also, I strongly encourage the use of that funding email to help put them all in one place. And I check that daily so that I can make sure that we have everything up to speed. So please utilize that. Our Funding and Performance Committee consists of 5 members right now. It's actually the largest committee we've had in a while for this group. And I think we have a really wonderful group reading and formulating these applications. So right now our chair of that committee is Kristen Gallick. She's with the Fredericksburg Department of Social Services. Clay Mahulides, who's with Chris Marr. Ashley McNeil is with the Community Foundation. Sarah Walsh with United Way. And Michelle Potts Wishes with Spotsylvania County Schools. And most of these folks have been in our world for a very long time and are been embedded into our community and serve us very well when it comes to making funding decisions. But I know I get this question a lot about who would be reading applications. If you need to get in contact with any of the folks that are on this committee, that funding email at fredericksburgcoc.org is the best way to do that. All right, so just a brief overview of what the HUD NOFO is for. So in particular, this funding is designed to promote a community-wide commitment to ending funding or ending homelessness. It provides funding to nonprofits that are focused on minimizing trauma and getting people moved back into housing as quickly as possible. It has a lot of promotion of access of mainstream resources and the partner within a community. It does not assume that any of our nonprofits do this work alone, and so we do a lot of work in our application around how coordinated we are with folks throughout the community. And then in particular, it is about optimizing self-sufficiency for folks who are experiencing homelessness. We want to provide them with assistance that moves them as quickly as possible, but we also want to help them move on from assistance. So you'll see a lot of those things kind of come through in our questions, in the questions that we operate, and I'll kind of walk through what that looks like and how that division works. All right, so just an overview of how much funding we're actually talking about. I can say I'm very proud of this number right now. When I first started with the CoC 6 years ago, we were the lowest funded CoC in the state. We were about $300,000, and so in the last 5 years, we have increased that by $200,000, which is very hard to do for HUD funding. So I'm very proud of our community for everything that we've done. So we have about a little over $500,000 to put towards projects. In addition, we always have an opportunity to increase that funding every year. So right now we have two pots to be able to help us do that. Regular CoC bonus funds, and we're looking at a little under $50,000, and then a domestic violence centered bonus, and that's a little under $70,000. I've also put on here so you guys kind of know who are currently funded by these funds. There's a little bit of funds for HMIS. That's the data management system that we use here at GWRC to oversee homeless services. And then two PSH projects, that's permanent supportive housing. Micah helps us with running those. And then we have had a domestic violence project run by Empower House, and with all of Mindy's hard work has steadily increased that every year. So that project is now up to about $150,000. Eligible project types under this program are permanent supportive housing. So that includes housing, usually master leased, but housing with intensive case management. That is no time frame on that housing, so people use it as long as they need it in order to be. Usually, it's targeted towards our chronically homeless folks, and so folks usually remain in that project for a number of years in using that. So that project can pay for things like case management, the actual leasing, utilities, and all of that support that kind of comes with focusing those people on there. Rapid rehousing is our short-term housing project for folks who need a little bit of assistance to get in, stabilize, and kind of continue on their own. And so that, again, pays for things like the rental case management and all of the things that come along with actually getting people into that project. Joint transitional housing and rapid rehousing was added to this project, I think, about 3 years ago. So a couple of years ago, HUD said transitional housing isn't a good model to use. They have gone back on that and realized that it does work for some populations. In particular, the ones that they see most for this funding will be domestic violence, reentry, mental health, and youth. And so transitional housing and a rapid rehousing project is just that. It can offer both to program participants. So it has all of your traditional shelter expenses that come along with transitional housing. But even though transitional housing, still working to get them housed as quickly as possible, and therefore have those funds for rapid rehousing to utilize as well. Supportive services only projects for coordinated entry, those are going to be things like our helpline, our prioritization process, any funds that are needed to actually run the system in which people flow through. And then HMIS projects are only eligible for HMIS leads. Domestic violence providers are eligible to put some HMIS funding on their projects specifically, but it's not a separate HMIS project. So those are your types. If you're thinking of a project that's outside of some of these, then this probably isn't the funding source for you. We can talk about other funding sources. There's some others that have just come out recently as well. But for HUD specific, these are the only projects that are eligible for these funds. There's two different types of projects, and you'll hear me say this throughout the presentation, especially when we go over questions. Renewal projects and new projects. So renewal projects are projects that already currently have funding. So that will only be those 4 projects that we had listed on the previous screen. New projects are anyone who's applying for the first time or is expanding one of those renewal projects. So there is not a separate expansion project application. It all follows under new because it's a new part of your project. But the portion you're already funded for is the renewal, and anything else is the new. All right, just a little bit about how the actual selection process works, and I will give the caveat now. It is complicated, um, and the math can be difficult, but I'm happy to answer any questions that I can through this process. But HUD actually works in a tiered system for selection. And so COCs will receive applications, they'll score them, they'll rank them, and then they fall into two tiers. So if we add up the total of all of our projects, once we get to, this number is incorrect, there's an extra four, $483,000, then that's what projects fall in tier one. All of those projects are usually accepted and funded. I don't think I've ever seen tier one project not be accepted. So HUD will go through and accept every project that falls into their COC's tier one projects and accept them for funding. Then they'll take whatever funds that they have left over and they'll start to fund tier two projects. Tier two projects are ranked a little bit differently. So tier two will be given a project score, where tier one is just based on where your COC falls across the country. Tier two is going to be based on where your project falls across the country. So your project score, if you fall into tier two, will be made up of three parts. It'll be a COC score, so it's basically that COC application that we submit. They score us on all of those questions. How we score directly affects your project. And so you can receive up to 50 points. It's a direct proportion of the application score. I think the overall score for COC is 200 points. So they'll translate that into a percentage for the projects for this score. The second piece is a project ranking score. So it depends on how many projects we rank and where that project falls, up to 40 points. They will do a proportion of 40 points for projects and how they're ranked. And then finally, you have up to 10 points based on your commitment to Housing First. There's questions in the HUD application that ask you about Housing First, and they rank and score those. And so you can receive up to 10 points for being Housing First. So they add all of those together, you get a score of 100, and then they put them in chronological order and score until they run, or accept until they run out of money. The complicated piece comes in with DV bonuses. As you can see in tier two, our tier two amount does not include the DV bonus, and that's because the DV bonus can come from a separate DV pot. And so that's what this little asterisk and caveat down at the bottom is. If a DV project is selected for the specific DV funds, then that project will be pulled up. Anything that's ranked below it will move up. If it is not selected, then it stays, and anything that's below it usually doesn't get funded because now you have more money in your tier two than what's actually allowed. I know that's very complicated. For those who actually end up applying, we can walk through. If you have questions about it, I have a slideshow around just the ranking process for funding and performance, and I'm happy to kind of walk you through that. But overall, what you need to know is write a really good application, rank really high, and hopefully you'll file in tier one. And then tier two is really on probably the most competitive process across the country. So a little bit about funding overview. We've been talking a lot about what the projects can be used for, how projects will be selected, but what's the overall local process? So HUD has a federal national process that they use, but require each COC to create a local process for this funding. So the George Washington Regional Commission, as the COC's lead agent and collaborative applicant, serves as the person who actually submits the funding application. So no grantees are able to receive HUD funding outside of the process that we're going over today. If you want to be a part of the application, you have to go through this funding process. They changed that about 20 years ago. They used to have folks apply directly, but now they're really more interested in the community response rather than what individual agencies are doing, and really put the onus on COCs to choose agencies to be a part of that overall system that they've built. So again, the only way to be included is through this funding process. And if you have any questions about that, we can go over that. But I'm going to go through what that funding process actually looks like. So there's two key documents for any of our funding that I would love to highlight and make sure that you guys are aware of. First is a policy priorities. I think we actually changed the name to funding priorities. These are available on our website. It really outlines our key programmatic considerations in determining any of our funding allocations. So if you want to know what projects, and there's always lots of projects, and we'd love to fund everything in the community that has to do with homeless services, but we don't have that kind of funds coming in, and so therefore we've created some priorities about these are the things that we really need in our community right now. And so we update this every year. It has been updated and it's available on the funding page of our website. Second piece of that is funding policy and priorities. It really outlines the process of how to apply for funding, how to seek letters of support, anything at all to do with any funding processes that the CoC does. Again, that's updated every year. The updated one is on our website as well. So basic funding eligibility. In order to apply for funding, you have to be a member of the CoC. So if you do not have a formal membership with us, you want to make sure that you become a member before you submit an application, because you do have to be a member in order to be eligible to apply. And then the second and probably biggest piece is that you have to adhere to coordinated entry policies and procedures. And so the four biggest things for us is following Housing First, participating in coordinated entry, basically meaning that you're part of a prioritization process, you're a part of how people flow through our system, your program is integrated into that. All of the things around coordinated entry. There's an entire coordinated entry manual on our website that walks you through how people flow. If you read that and kind of place your organization and program within that, you'll kind of understand what that means. But if you have questions, please let me know. We have developed project standards for each type of homeless services that we offer, everything from street outreach to shelter to housing. So we have basic standards that we expect every project who's funded through us to meet. Again, those are all available on our website. And so if you have a project that you're going to apply for, I think you want to look at those and make sure that you're meeting all those project standards. And then the final and big piece is data. We require all projects to enter data through HMIS or a comparable database for our victim service providers. So you have to collect data through our system. Our system is very similar to like a health management system, but we help provide training and everything else. But if you are not a part of HMIS and are funded, you will need to get into the system. And then finally, you need to be basic eligibility for any funding agencies. There's lots of funding requirements that come along with federal and state funds. And so those are all available in the HUD NOFA. So you can look through those and make sure that your project meets eligibility. If you have any questions about whether or not you're eligible and it determines whether or not you're going to submit an application, please give me a call or shoot me an email and I'll help you walk through whether or not you're eligible. I would hate for someone to assume that they're not and not apply and them actually be. So please just let me know if you need help in determining whether or not you're actually eligible to apply for funding. So the overall funding process, there is a lot of steps to funding process, and a lot of this has to do with transparency and objectiveness, which is one of our key values here at the CoC. So you'll see multi-steps, a lot of public involvement, a lot of public notification through this entire process. But most of our funding process follow this same 7 steps. So we put out a notice of funding, the applications and scoring sheets. We always put them up front. You know exactly what our funding and performance committee is scoring you on before you submit an application. So if you look at the scoring sheet and figure out if you've fully answered the questions, it's going to be based on those scorings. Once project applications are received by the deadline, our funding and performance reviews and scores all applications individually and then gets together and comes up with a collaborative scoring. Funding performance will then take all of those that they've scored and accept or reject the application. Accepting and rejecting means whether or not it's actually going to be included in our full application that goes to HUD. And then if accepted, then they're going to determine the amount. So it could be more, could be less, could be the same as what you apply for. They actually determine both the inclusion and the amount that each project will get. And then from there, projects are ranked in the order of priority. So that's when they're going to say, this one's number one because it's the thing, if we only had this much money that we would absolutely want to fund, and then they keep going down. Projects are always notified of the outcome of their applications and their ranking, and then there's always an appeals process following that notification to let folks who feel like they've either been left out or were unfairly scored and ranked to be able to appeal. We have an entire appeals document on our website which talks about what's an eligible appeal and what's not. And if you have any questions about appeals, please submit them to the funding at fredericksburgcoc.org email, and that's also where your appeal would actually be submitted. Once appeals are closed, funding outcome and applications are submitted to the board for final approval, posted to our website, and then actually submitted through the funder that we're applying to. So I'm going to pause for just a second and switch over to our local NOFA and just kind of walk through that. While I switch over, does anyone have any questions right now? Okay. So this is our local NOFA. This will provide you with lots of general information and resources for how to actually apply and what we're looking for. And so it gives you a little bit of brief information about the CoC program competition, lots of links to all of the CoC program page under HUD's website, walks you through some of that basic eligibility again. And so you see some additional things here that you do have to have a DUNS number and a SAMS and all of those things. If you need any help with any of those, please just reach out to us. Gives you lots of information about the individual projects that are eligible and a link to the NOFA where you can find what those threshold requirements are for those projects. Estimated funding, which we went over, and then I'll just quickly go over the timeline so you guys can see that. So applications are currently open. Those are posted on our website, and all the resources that you need to apply are there. Applications are due August 21st at 5 p.m. Anything that's submitted after 5 p.m. will not be considered. So please make sure that you are working on this and working early. I would strongly recommend, because of the technology issues of both of HUD's website in particular, which we'll go over, which is eSNAPs, I would strongly recommend submitting early. So please just be cognizant of that due date. It is August 21st at 5 p.m. The funding performance will have about 2 weeks to review all the applications, and then they are going to meet on September 6th to come up with that consolidated scoring sheet and the ranking. Right after that, all applicants will be notified. So you get some really instant gratification from how your application went from this process because it's shoved in so tight. So within 3 weeks of your application, you'll know exactly what it looks like. Appeals are going to be due shortly after. And then our application is fully needing to be submitted to HUD by the end of September. So a little bit about how you actually apply. There are 2 applications for this process. So if you're going to apply for funding, you're going to submit one through the HUD portal and then one through the GWRC portal. So for eSNAPs, which I will go over and show you where to find applications. Applications in eSNAPs are now available. I did check this morning and they are now available. And that will give some brief information on your project. It is the only piece that will be submitted to HUD through the full application process, but we do have a supplemental application that's just for local use. We use it for actually scoring our projects, but it does not get submitted to HUD. But HUD application does not provide enough information for us to objectively score projects on their value, their performance, or their need. And so therefore we have a list of other questions that we ask of applicants. For the supplemental application, we have moved to an electronic submission process, and so that link is here for you. We use Good Grants. It's a very easy program to use, and we'll walk through that. But you do have to submit both to be fully submitted. So make sure that both your HUD application through eSnaps and your supplemental application through Good Grants is submitted by that August 21st at 5 p.m. deadline. The interesting thing about HUD applications is even after you submit your form, it may not be done with in the HUD system. Funding and Performance is able to make some comments and give some suggestions on things that they would change about the HUD portion of your application to make it really strong, especially if it falls in tier 2, how to make it a strong project score. And so therefore, we can open those up for revisions after Funding and Performance reviews them. And any revisions that are suggested are due by September 13th. So you have a little bit of time to get things back together and make any revisions that is needed. Again, our appeals process is fully outlined in our website. Appeals are due September 11th at noon. If there's any questions at all at any of our process at any point about anything, no matter how big or small, please reach out to funding@fredericksburgcoc.org for any assistance. Okay, so I'm going to switch over yet again and pause one more time if anyone has questions. Okay, so the first piece that I'm going to show you is the HUD portal. So in order to access the HUD portion of the grant, you do have to be registered through eSnaps. On their competition page, you should be able to access this and register for an account. If you plan on applying, please register early, make sure you have access to your account and get everything set up. It can be a process with HUD, so please make sure you're doing that now in order to submit on time. So once you actually log in, you'll see this screen. In order to access funding, the first thing that you have to do is register for the funding opportunity and then actually get to the project. And then there is navigation guides. I'll show you where to find that, but just to walk you through it quickly, there is funding opportunity registrations. You'll see all the different funding types. Again, this is where that renewal versus new project comes up. So if you're trying to submit for a renewal of funding, then you would click the renewal project application. If it's a new or expansion, then you're going to use the new project funding application. I'm going to go ahead and do ours, which is the CoC project application. To register, you're just going to click this box. It's asking, are you sure if you want to register? You would say yes. And now we're registered. So you'll see now the best way to know if whether or not you've actually done it is you'll see applicants registered and you have a 1 instead of a 0 now. Now, in order to access the actual project application, you now have to go to the projects. I filter because we have so many years at this point. You add it, you add your applicant project name. If you are a returning application, you'll see that you are able to copy over your application details from the previous year if that is helpful. So if you're wanting to start not from scratch, but utilize some of the information that you put in last year, that you are still able to do that. So just make sure that you collect that or select that application to carry over from. Now, when you go back, you'll now see that you have this project here. You'll click edit. sorry, you'll hit submissions over on the side, find your project, and that's where you actually act. So it's a three-step process. You're going to register under funding opportunity registrations. You're going to name your project under projects, and then under submissions, you'll actually be able to access the application and all of its questions. So if you click that little folder, it'll pull up all the questions, and you'll be able to start answering them. If you have any issues walking through that, like I said, there is a navigational guide, and I'll show you where those are. But please let me know, and I'll be happy to help in any way that I can. All right. The second piece is the Good Grants application. And so through that link that's on the NOFA, you'll be able to get to this page. We utilize this for all of our funding. If you're a first-time user, you will need to register for an account. If you already have an account, you should be able to log in pretty easily. When you log in, this is what you'll see. And so super easy to use. You'll start an application under the HUD CoC program competition. You'll name your project, and then you'll be able to start putting in all of your project applications. So the only thing that you'll need to do is complete everything that's on this and submit that to us. It'll go directly to us. Funding will be able to see it, but all of your projects are here. So super easy to use, a little more intuitive than the HUD system, but both are still required in order to be eligible for funding. All right. So rather than walk through, while I'm on the screen, let me show you where some of the resources are for HUD. HUD has a continual care competition page on their website. This is linked in the NOFA, so please utilize this page for any questions about the project. You'll see here you can find a copy of the NOFA, our registration guides for how you actually do that, lots of project application details and navigational guides. So the navigational guides have not been released yet, it looks like, but they're going to actually walk you through getting to those pages in the system. In the meantime, if you need help, just let me know. Detailed instructions will actually walk you through every question and what they're looking for. So what I do when I try to do some of these applications is I have the detailed instructions on one page and the actual application on another, so that I can make sure I hit all the points that they're looking for. So it's really helpful to kind of have these open at the same time so you know exactly what they're asking for in the HUD portion of the application. They do have office hours and webinars on a regular basis, so if you need anything or have questions for them, there's an AAQ, which is Ask a Question portal. You can do that. You can attend office hours or webinars through HUD. Also, as always, we are here as a resource for you. All right, so before we kind of close out for what I have, I'm going to walk through the questions and just show you kind of what we're looking at. Rather than walking through them in Good Grants, I'm actually going to walk through them in a Word document. The Word documents are available on our website. It can be much easier to write your answers in a Word document than copy and paste them over into Good Grants or into the HUD system. So I've supplied you all the local questions for your review. All right, so this is the questions for a majority of the applications that we receive. They are the same for permanent supportive housing, rapid rehousing, and joint transitional housing and rapid rehousing together. First thing that we're looking for is we like to be able to match your application on a local level to the HUD application, so that's why we're asking what did you name those projects in eSNAP so we can connect them and move them over. We also have you certify that you meet all the eligibility requirements, so those are just a checkbox. And then we have a ton of narrative questions. So we do have character limits. It is set in Good Grants. It will not let you go any further. Same thing for HUD. But all of these questions are required. So we're looking at what's the community need. Show the Funding and Performance Committee that this project is required for our community in order to be successful in preventing and ending homelessness. So we have we split these out this year, one for renewal, one for new and expansion, to really give you an opportunity to describe your project. So that's been one thing we've had a lot of feedback on. So it's really hard to do both an expansion or a new and a renewal all in 3,000 characters. So we split those out this year. A new question for us this year is that funding justification question. And what this is really getting at is, why does it have to be this funding that funds your project? So we want to understand, out of all the funding that you're able to apply for the project that you're looking to fund, why does it have to be CoC funding in order to do that? We also have a little bit in here about what's the impact of not receiving the funding, or if there's any reasons for increases or decreases in the amount that you're having. So a little bit around funding justification. This question is not scored. It is more for ranking and review, and gives our funding and performance a little more context as we're walking through projects for ranking and selection, but necessarily does not get scored. We have questions around how you leverage mainstream resources, what your system partnerships look like. And then 6 and 7 are still bonus points for us. So have you actually leveraged other housing resources? This specifically is looking at whether or not you have 25% of your units for PSH or 25% of your participants served in RH being covered by a non-CoC or ESG housing resource. And so there's lots of pieces to this. If you say that you do, we want letters of commitment. We want to be able to really see how that connection and how you've leveraged those housing resources. Same thing with healthcare. We want to know if you have partnerships with healthcare and whether or not that's covering a large portion of those participants who are being funded by this project. We do require written commitment for full points, which actually outlines the value of that commitment and what services healthcare is offering. So if you have any questions about what exactly is acceptable or not acceptable, please reach out to me. We have a lot of questions on coordinated entry and accessibility. This is a priority of ours and of HUD's about how services are being used. So the first one is, do you use coordinated entry system? And if you don't, what's your alternative process? In particular, DV providers have a separate system that mirrors ours, mostly for confidentiality and anonymity, but they are on a comparable coordinated entry system. So we just want to hear about what that looks like for you. Housing first, we are talking about whether or not you quickly move participants into permanent housing without any preconditions, making sure that we don't screen out for preconditions and that people are not terminated for any reason. It really should be only the most egregious things that have someone terminated from a project. We know that we serve hard people, and so therefore how do we work with those barriers rather than screening them out or terminating their service because they have them. Another big priority for us is racial barriers and assessing the racial disparity of homeless services. And so we ask questions about whether or not you've assessed your programs for racial disparities. NAEH has a racial disparity tool, which we sent out a couple of weeks ago through our news blast and to our members. It's a really great tool to really look at how your services may be inadvertently or vertently creating racial disparities. And we also want to know, okay, so you looked at it, so what are you going to do about it? And so the next questions are about taking some action steps to actually eliminate those barriers that have been found. For HUD and for the CoC, a big question for us is whether or not we're funding high-performing projects. And so we have a lot of questions about project performance. Things around access to permanent housing, cost effectiveness, rapid placement in permanent housing. For many of our new projects, you might not have data. We are asking for you to put in what you anticipate those to be. So some metrics and goals that you would have for your first year. Finally, we are looking at program operations and administration. So we want to make sure that your agency is capable of spending these funds and performing well under what you say you're going to do. So we have questions about organizational capacity, staff capacity, prior experience, findings for people who are looking at those, and whether or not the last time you were funded, if you spent all your funding. So finally, the last portion of our application is attachments. All of our projects are required to submit project policies and procedures and job descriptions, as well as for any renewal or expansion projects, we do need a copy of the APR, which is your annual report, annual performance report that you submit to HUD. Our new projects won't have that because they have not done a project before, and so that is not required for new projects, but project policies and procedures about how you're actually going to run your project and job descriptions are still required. Every year we have an organizational review. If you participated in that last year, you do not have to submit the agency attachments. If you did not participate in that last year, then we also require a spending plan, board of directors listing, the org chart, a 990, and a profit loss statement. There is a template for the spending plan on our website we use to understand how much money you currently have going into a project like this. So that's what that is asking for, is the sources and what you're spending those funds on currently. And then all the other ones should be generated by you. If you have questions about whether or not you participated in the organizational review and need to submit these, please let me know, and I'll be happy to ask and look through our files and figure out if you participated in that. The last of the supplemental questions just has to do with anyone who's applying for a domestic violence project. So not to put added burden on Mindy and any other domestic violence applicants, but there's a lot of other questions that HUD takes into consideration in determining whether or not to pull out DV applications for that DV bonus. So that's why there's those extra questions. But looking at just how you provide trauma-informed care, ensure DV survivor safety, and still be able to move people as quickly as possible to housing. So there's lots of questions about those. Happy to answer any questions about how you get data or help with any of those for any of our projects, really, not even just domestic violence. All right. So I'm going to stop sharing for now and kind of turn it over to you guys. And if there are any questions that you have at all about the overall process, please let me know.
Hey, Sam, I do have a bunch of questions, so I'll be sending you an email if that's okay.
Yeah, that's perfect.
And maybe, might even be requesting it.
Yeah, that's perfectly fine.
Hi, Samantha. I just have like a general question of, so this is our first time sitting in on this, and we're thinking, more so a project for next year, possible funding. How much does this application vary year to year? Is this pretty much sort of the format we could plan for next year, or does it change pretty dramatically?
Yeah, it doesn't change a whole lot from year to year. Sometimes there's some additional questions or different priorities that get added. Usually it gets bigger, not smaller. So I think if you kind of have answers to many of these, I love that you're coming so early and thinking about a next year project. Over the next year, we are happy to help provide technical assistance. I know even a month for a project or for an application of this size can be really difficult. And so starting throughout the year to help get TA from us of how to make a really strong project application can be really helpful. So we're here to help as you kind of walk through that process and preparing for next year. But I do not think that you'll see a huge change in their application or ours. We really from year to year make it easier and try to get more clarification from projects. But overall consensus doesn't really change.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Yeah. Any other questions at this point? All right. Well, Juanita.
Yes, Samantha. I no probably have lots of questions also, but I wanted to introduce Erica Gaffney. She's doing grants for us now, and so what I'll probably do is set up a separate meeting for us to meet with you.
Yeah, that's great.
Okay.
Nice to meet you, Samantha.
Nice to meet you too, Erica. All right, so I have on my list to get with Mindy and get with Juanita and Erica. But if you think of anything else in the meantime, or you have anything that comes up, please let me know. This is going to be posted to our website if you want to rewatch it and hear me talk again for 45 minutes. But I know it's a difficult and complicated process, so please send all questions that you have, and I'll work as quickly as I can to help give you as much TA as possible. So usually what ends up happening is that we get absorbed by the HUD NOFA for the next 2 months. So just know that this is one of our bigger priorities. And so we'll get back to you as soon as we can. But thank you guys so much for joining. And I look forward to kind of following up with all of you.